I have already discussed about Infinity War in another stream with Fringy and Fratanga. I think Infinity War is a good movie. It's pretty enjoyable. I cannot wait for the sequel. But of course, ever since Infinity War pops up, there are tons of articles that give in some really hot takes. Fringy, Fratanga, and I were reading the entirety of one of the great hot takes, which is how Infinity War's main influence is none other than Dark Souls.
The influence of Dark Souls on Avengers Infinity War.
Yeah. But that's not the only hot take on Infinity War. The New Yorker has a tweet talking about how Infinity War have characters that aren't introduced. They just show up and their behavior is entirely defined by the templates set for them in the other movies. In other words, New Yorker doesn't understand how the Marvel Cinematic Universe works. And my personal favorite hot take, superheroes don't wear ponytails, and that is indeed pretty sexist. Oh boy, Vox, keep giving in the hot takes right there. However, none of those hot takes compare to a hot take from The Guardian. Unlike the other publications, The Guardian decides to talk about something more complex, like the superheroes and the supervillains' motivation. But instead of talking it in a manner that is reasonable and nuanced, they decided to talk about it in a way that brings a smile to my face.
What if superheroes aren't really the good guys? We always thought of them as flawed, noble, and on our side, but perhaps they are just dangerous right-wing vigilantes.
That's right, guys. Superheroes are right-wing vigilantes. The hot takes of Infinity War and actually many other superhero films just keep on coming. Don't worry, for those of you who don't want to be spoiled, this video will contain no spoilers on Infinity War, which is why it is absolutely recommended for those of you who don't want to be spoiled to immediately see the movie regardless, because people on the internet can be absolute dicks. Not me though. I am a dick, but I don't go that low. And you know who is definitely not a dick? People who make fan arts. Or at least fan arts of me. Here's a fan art of me from Arashi Kamiya. Thank you so much. I look pretty. And yes, some people should really get help. Anyway, putting the right-wing vigilante line aside, this article mostly talks about how the supervillains in superhero films have a point. Congratulations, writer of this blog. You have acknowledged the complexity of superhero films that are quite prominent ever since 10 years ago.
In the predecessor to Infinity War, Captain America Civil War, the US Secretary of State visits the Avengers HQ and points out the elephant in the room.
What would you call a group of US-based, enhanced individuals who routinely ignore sovereign borders and inflict their will wherever they choose, and who, frankly, seem unconcerned about what they leave behind?
We call them rogue metahumans, whose efforts are not hampered by any source of permission from the United Nations, which the Avengers are certainly going to get if they sign the Accords. The government is under the impression that any sort of oversight is going to prevent more destruction, but that doesn't take into account that both the Avengers and the government aren't perfect. So of course the Avengers are gonna make mistakes like Sokovia and Lagos. Did the government expect them to be able to save everyone? One of the main issues of the film, and actually the comics as well as far as I've heard, is that we don't really know what's inside the Accords. We know the general gist of it, like how the Avengers are only going to answer the threats if the United Nations grant them permission, but as Rogers pointed out, people have agendas and agendas change.
Like their audience, Iron Man, Captain America, and Cole thought of themselves as flawed but noble superheroes uniting for a cause, until suddenly they were confronted with the possibility they might be dangerous, destructive, unregulated vigilantes.
And regulations would somehow prevent the deaths of more innocent people? Again, what form of regulation that we're talking here? It's not specified. The content of the Accords itself is not discussed. Let's just say that all of them agreed, and there's an alien attack happening in New York once again. Should they wait for permission from the United Nations? That is assuming that that's how the Accords work, otherwise this is slowly turning into that dumb scene from Metroid Other M again. The article then quotes Vision.
Our very strength invites challenge. Challenge incites conflict. Oversight is not an idea that can be dismissed out of hand.
I agree with Vision, except that once again, we don't really know the content of the Accords and how it will give oversight to the Avengers. What kind of limitations would this Accord give?
It's a question worth asking. What makes superheroes the good guys?
Because they're not trying to wipe out humanity. They're trying to save them. Keyword, try. Yes, they fail so many times, but that's what makes superheroes human. That's what makes them relatable. That's what makes them interesting. Just because they fail on saving the lives of innocent people doesn't make them supervillains, who in a lot of cases are trying to destroy people's lives. For God's sake, you are referencing Civil War. Do you know the basis of that entire discussion scene? Both Rogers and Stark are trying to save people's lives. They have this debate so that they can know which methods are effective. Rogers diligently read through the Accords at the beginning because he wants to know other people's perspective. He disagrees, but that doesn't mean that he can't consider other points. Both of these sides are discussing about minimalizing damage and saving people's lives. They are not perfect in their job. They are acknowledging their mistakes and taking responsibility. That's why that discussion scene happens. That's what makes superheroes to be the good guys. The moment they are the bad guys is when they decided to join Hydra. This is a very basic concept that somehow flew over your head. A toddler has better grasp of this than you.
It's taken as a given in these movies, but there's a nagging sense that for all their tales of heroism and sacrifice and vanquishing alien threats to Earth, the superhero moral compass is no longer pointing in the right direction.
Okay, article, name me one moment in the MCU where Iron Man or Captain America or any of the Avengers decide out of the blue that wiping out the rest of the humanity is a good thing. I don't think so, article. The article then proceeds to talk about how superhero stories are getting more and more complex, which is as obvious if you just follow pretty much any sorts of superhero films ever since 10 to 15 years ago.
Where does that leave a good guy such as Batman, who operates both as judge and jury, even applying the death penalty?
Whoa, article. Batman does not apply the death penalty. In some instances, yes, but not to the point where every junkie should be killed.
As with the Avengers, Batman was called out on this in the recent Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Bruce Wayne...
Yeah, I know that scene. Play the clip.
Civil liberties are being trampled on in your city. Good people living in fear. I've seen it, Mr. Wayne. He thinks he's above the law.
I think you should live in Gotham City, Clark. You will beg to be put back in Metropolis. The article then talks about Captain America and how he shifts from being a Nazi puncher in the first film into a guy who has conflicting morals and goals in the second. They also quoted my favorite scene in Winter Soldier.
We compromised, sometimes in ways that made us not sleep so well. But we did it so that people could be free. This isn't freedom. This is fear.
The point that the article tries to articulate with this paragraph is that Captain America's enemies are getting blurrier and blurrier. The villain's motivations are becoming more understandable as time went on, and the line between good guys and the bad guys are starting to blur. So that's when the article asks once again, who are the good guys here? I think you should stop looking at the situation broadly and start thinking of it specifically. Civil War is a morally gray film. I think every side of the discussion has a relatable goal, even if I disagree with their methods. So if I ask the question on who the good guys are, I would certainly ask the same questions as well. Even Captain America has his biases that I disagree with. The thing that you need to understand, article, is just because a character is the protagonist of the movie doesn't mean that they're the good guys. I would say that Infinity War is technically a film where Thanos is the protagonist. I still stand by that opinion, and if you see the film, it will make perfect sense why. So this is when the article gets more specific. The article now talks about Black Panther and how Killmonger makes a great point. Do you want to know why Killmonger is the bad guy, article? Because he's going to use Wakanda's resources to take over the world and free black people from their oppressors by lethal force!
His grievances are actually perfectly valid. How could resource-rich Wakanda stand by and let all these atrocities, slavery, colonialism, world wars, racism, happen to their African brothers and sisters?
Writer, this isn't the 1800s anymore. I have two questions. How will the oppressors of black people pay for reparations? And when will it stop? Because if it doesn't stop, then you're just being a lazy, entitled douchebag.
Killmonger's defeated, but he wins the argument. Black Panther realizes he's not the good guy. At the close of the movie, Wakanda begins to engage with the rest of the world, albeit on its own limited terms, which are a far cry from the arm uprising Killmonger had in mind.
That's not even a good argument because he's not the only person who has the idea of sharing Wakanda's resources into the world. T'Challa's ex-lover Nakia and his sister Shuri are also the ones who have those ideas. Just because they agree with the villain doesn't make them the villain. The article that references Thor Ragnarok, who has Hela that wants to take over Asgard. Her motivation is because Odin was also quite evil. Do you know what happens after she takes over Asgard? She will take over other worlds as well, which probably includes Earth. That's why Thor is in there to stop her. If you are in Thor's position, do you think that you're just gonna let her take over the world? Then the article points out to Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming, a great villain for certain, and yes, he is quite sympathetic, but that still doesn't make his actions right. Then the article references The Dark Knight Rises of all films, where Bane talks about fighting the corrupt and redistributing the wealth.
Gotham is yours. None shall interfere. Do as you please.
Oh man, you clearly haven't seen The Dark Knight Rises to realize that Bane took Gotham by force. And this brings me to perhaps the hottest take on Infinity War. Thanos did nothing wrong.
This brings up to Infinity War's villain Thanos. With a name like that, you know he's not a good guy. But nor is he textbook evil. He doesn't want to build an empire or amass wealth or any of the usual despotic bad guy things. He just wants to restore balance to the universe, indiscriminately. You could call him a Malthusian extremist. The universe is finite, its resources are finite. If left unchecked, it will cease to exist, he explains. So many mouths and not enough to go round. You wouldn't call that evil if David Attenborough had said it.
Okay, without spoiling anything, Thanos is indeed a great villain. I love Thanos in this film. He has a sympathetic goal but utterly misguided in the methods. And this is where the article puts the climax in this Avengers Infinity War hot take.
Thanos' methods are hardly humane, but there is logic to his argument. Climate change and environmental destruction are inarguable threats. Human existence is unsustainable, but Avengers gotta avenge. Rather than debating the validity of Thanos' arguments and acknowledging that something ought to change, the superheroes once again fight tooth and nail to preserve the status quo.
Yes, that's right. Debate Thanos. Debate him. Debate the one individual that has slaughtered half of almost every civilization in the galaxy. Debate him. Go tell him that he's wrong. Isn't this coming from the same publication that refuses to debate people when they're proven wrong or when they're called fake news? Instead of debating people who have legitimate criticisms about your outlet, instead of debating those you keep constantly calling right-wingers, Nazis, etc., instead of applying sympathy and compassion to the people who disagree with your ideals, you instead want to do all of those things to a supervillain who has a clear motivation of slaughtering innocent people in order to restore balance to the universe. Guardian, your priorities are severely misplaced.